Welcome to Floating Questions, the podcast where curiosity leads, we follow, and stories unfold. My name's Ray, simply asking questions. Shall we begin? Hi, Tristan.
Hey, Ray. How's it going?
Great. It's Sunday and it's sunny outside, so I'm really happy.
It's a good day when it's sunny in the Pacific Northwest, always.
Thank you for joining the first ever episode of Floating Questions.
Thank you for having me.
Would you like to give the audience a little bit self-introduction?
Yeah. I'm Tristan. Among other things, I work professionally as a data scientist, and I kind of have like an inclination for mission-oriented work, which is sort of where my last couple of years of focus have been. I know you from our time at Deloitte together. We had a chance to work on some projects, and we found that we had a lot of overlapping interests. And when I'm not thinking about work, I love all the outdoor stuff. And if you're confused about my accent, it's because it's French and South African.
You were born in South Africa.
No, actually, I was not born in South Africa.
Oh.
Nope. I was born in Mauritius. I grew up in many places, including South Africa eventually. So I did boarding school ages 9 through 18 in South Africa. But prior to that, it was always between France and. So I think I'd lived around a dozen countries before I started boarding school in South Africa. Lived in like Tunisia, Yugoslavia, Morocco, Mexico, St. Lucia in the Caribbean, etc. I joke that like my role is just the foreigner, basically. Because if I'm in France, I'm South African. And if I'm in South Africa, I'm French. And if I'm in the States, I'm like whatever. So it's just like, yeah, I'm just that guy that grew up elsewhere.
Why did you move around so much? And I presume it's because of your parents, but like, what made you guys move around so much?
Yeah, my parents were spies. No.
For sure.
My parents worked for a French vacation company called Club Med. They are a resort company that was, I think they sort of had their heydays in the 70s and 80s, but what they were very strong at was like sort of like discovering new holiday destinations and opening up resorts there.
That's crazy, honestly. That's a lifestyle that's like very difficult to imagine for me. Because I grew up in one place. How did you feel as a kid growing up? Like a lot of people moving from place to place, probably they struggle with, maintaining friendship and have a sense of a belonging. Did you go through those struggles?
I think that answer is always difficult because you're sort of looking back and trying to infer. But I guess what I can say is that one, just your perception of things as a kid is just not the same as an adult. So the lens through which you judge things are very different. I've been told that it happened like at least on one occasion where I made like friends with one of the guest kids I was visiting for a week and then would cry when they left at the end of the week. What I can say for sure is that it's made me very like malleable and adaptable to cultures. You can drop me anywhere on earth and I'll be fine. I'll find a way to get on with people and travel and get my way around. So I think that's kind of like one of my skills that I find in my career is that like I can speak to people in the boardroom and I can speak to farmers all the same, no problem.
Okay. Well, since you brought up work, maybe can you explain a little bit what were you doing?
In my previous role, I worked as the Director of Data Science and Engineering at Maza, which is a forestry social enterprise in Kenya that works with smallholder farmers to grow sustainable wood. Quite a mouthful. But basically, we were the biggest forestry company in Kenya, but we had this interesting model where instead of owning any land and growing big forests on massive tracts of land like most forestry companies do, we worked with farmers that had half an acre, very small size plots with the idea that these trees could become a source of revenue for these smallholder farmers while allowing us to grow wood in a more like cost-effective manner and have other sort of like positive benefits, carbon offsets and all that. So that was Kamaza as a whole. And then my role there was essentially involving everything data from managing the data sets from all of the distinct business units to doing some of the modeling, carbon forecasting, things like that.
Wow, there's a lot for me to unpack there. Just want to make sure that I got the business model. It's a social enterprise.
Hmm.
It has, I presume, two folds of metrics. One is economic, another one is the social impact one. The economic one is that you would contract with the small farmers. They have small lots of land and then they grow trees. And then once the trees are mature, you guys would take the trees to sell on the market. Um, and the social aspect of it is to help farmers to get some returns on their land, or what is the form of social return?
Yeah, I think you said it pretty correctly. Double bottom line, if you will. One bottom line is just trying to run a profitable company, and the other is trying to have a positive impact in the community. The impact they were focused on was in the field of economic development. A lot of the farmers that we were working with were specifically the kind of farmers that were working in areas with degraded land or just basically not getting like a lot of attention from other nonprofits that try to help farmers increase their yields. And the idea was that, look, if you have this extra land where like you typically putting in the time is just not worth the effort, the returns on it, plant some trees there and we'll give you the trees, we'll give you the training to know how to manage the trees, all this for free. And once the trees are harvested, that like one-time payment is as a rough sort of rule of thumb would be enough to put like a kid through school.
I see. Do you know what was the funding story?
Yes, it's interesting. Maza went through different iterations. Initially, it was actually a nonprofit, so very much focused on like let's see how we can help farmers and let's see what we can do. And I think the founder, who was an American guy, Tevis, um, iterated on different things until he was like, okay, trees is the way to go. And I think after a while, they realized that if we do this as a social enterprise, it sort of opens up the opportunities for the kind of investors we'll have, and like maybe the scale of impact is going to be more important. That's kind of when they switched to the social enterprise model, because as the forestry company, the first thing they had to get right was seedlings, then they had to get planting right, and they had to get growth right. And so around the time that I joined, they had a small sawmill and sales team, and we were basically opened up the biggest sawmill in Kenya and I think East Africa maybe. And so there was like a big push on sort of developing that like latter part of the work and really being successful as far as commercializing the sell of timber.
Very interesting. How long does it usually take to finish one harvesting cycle? Because if the cycle is really long, you might run into some like cash problem.
Yeah. But the long answer is it depends. But I guess the short answer is 8 to 10 years, at least in the areas that we were looking at. We had like a very strong corporate finance team. And one of the things that they did is they created this vehicle, I believe is the term. They did an exchange where we will sell you the trees after we've planted them, like at age 2 or 3, so you can infuse some cash into the business. And at maturity, the business can buy back the trees at cost so that they can harvest it and sell it. I think the vehicle was created when the company was around 9 to 10 years old. So some of the very first harvests were all starting to come to mature, like the volume difference between year 1 and 8 and the quality difference and all that were very, it's a, it's not exactly a startup, but it is, there were some aspects startup like where we believe this to be successful in the long term. So we're going to like test this out while still running at a deficit.
So the funding essentially is from this vehicle, or there are other sources of funding as well.
And there were other sources of funding as well, definitely. The investors sort of doing that model of like, let's grow and then get to profits. Um,
Interesting. And social enterprise has, two goals: one economic, another one social benefit.
mhm.
Sometimes these two can be at odds with each other. Have you seen such examples and Komaza?
Yeah, it's a great point. Where the two can be at odds. The most obvious one is that like, if you were just like, purely a nonprofit, you would go and help everyone out, no matter the situation. Whereas in Kamaza, there were some farmers who were like, we can't work with you, unfortunately, because your land is too small. Your farm is so far in such a hard to reach area that like the cost of transport to get to it and extract the wood would negate any sort of profits. Unfortunately, people were very realistic about like, we can't help everyone.
Hmm, I see. And you also mentioned like the specific role that you were playing there is the director of data science and engineering. Maybe sharing a little bit of the kind of problems that you were trying to solve there.
Yeah. The first big project I worked on was getting Vera and VCS certification. Let me explain carbon credits really quickly. When like major corporations say they are trying to go climate neutral, one of the main ways that they achieve this is buying carbon credits. And so what that is that there'll be some kind of action or something that a company does that sequesters or prevents a certain amount of carbon getting into the atmosphere. For Kamasa, the planting of trees is what captures carbon. Capturing carbon is great, but it needs to meet a certain threshold before you can actually sell it out in the open market. And so this is where getting accreditation comes in. We're capturing all of this carbon and we'd like to be able to sell it in the open market so people can offset the impact. And companies like Vera and VCS are the ones that'll be like, all right, well, these are the things you need to show to prove that your credits are like sufficiently good enough a quality where you can go and sell it out in the open market. So one of the first projects was basically just trying to figure out like, how much carbon is Kamaza's trees actually sequestering.
Fascinating. How did you do that?
I guess the brief explanation is sending out people to sample and collect data on a lot of trees and then extrapolating that using a specific formula presented in the carbon certification process documentation to then come up with a total estimate.
I'm actually interested in the piece of collecting the samples. Do you hold some type of equipment and go around the trees and try to measure the amount of
Yep.
oxygen that's coming out of the tree?
No, so good thing. Forestry's been around for a long time. You can use these formulas that you take one measurement, and from that one measurement, you can pretty much extrapolate the rest. And usually what that measurement is, it's called the DBH, which is the diameter at breast height. So imagine you ran tape around the trunk of the tree at the chest height of a grown man. Measurement, the DBH, plus the species of trees. You can go from that one measurement to basically what the biomass is of the tree, and from biomass to carbon. And so the main thing that we had to work out was not all the trees are planted in the same area and not all the trees are planted in the same year. And so basically our problem was we need to try to find sampling according to where the trees are planted, when the trees are planted. And obviously we can't go out and measure every farm. So we need to go and measure a subset of it so that it meets like the standards required by the carbon estimation. A lot of the work was let's define our different strata. Let's figure out like what these strata represents as the total volume of the portfolio. So obviously like later years had more trees, therefore we needed to sample more of the bigger strata. And then let's then coordinate this effort where we had to go and measure, I think it was like 100 farms or something. All right, let's coordinate the field teams to go and measure these farms and how do we select the farms. And the fun part is figuring out how to deal with all of the things on the ground that might go wrong for sampling. From like the road has been completely washed over in a flood, I can't get to the farm. Or to I'm trying to measure a tree, but there's a big beehive on it, so it's not safe for me to get to it. A lot of that, a lot of that. So it was this interesting sort of conversation back and forth. Okay, we've succeeded in getting these data, but we didn't succeed in getting this. So how do we sort of get those two to work together so we can still meet the standard for the carbon project?
That is a fascinating one because I think, especially for people who are used to technology world, the data feels like it's automatically generated by your computer. Like for non-tech heavy enterprise, the data has to come from somewhere. And a lot of logistics and operational process needs to set up in such a way that you can easily collect the data.
I could spend a whole podcast talking to you about the kinds of issues on the ground that we would run to. Why, in theory, it should be easy. Like, go to that farm, measure those trees, and every reason why that might not be possible.
You know this data isn't perfect. How do you determine the threshold where, okay, this is good enough for calculation?
We did some like resampling of some farms. So we specifically went and had teams, separate teams, I should point out as well, go and collect the same farm twice to try and understand like how much, difference were there in any individual one team's measurements and all that. There isn't exactly a hard and fast line. There's no one telling you you're right, what's right or wrong. It's just sort of like, okay, the best you can do is just try to understand the scale of like, what's a potential range, and then some maybe smart people on my team would be like, all right, we can actually use that to interpolate into the equation, or we need to move forward. Let's just use this data. And if we do this next time, like, what are some of the things we should be aware of,
I mean, that
Uh,
totally makes sense. At the same time, because this is not a financial metric, you either have the money or you don't. The regulator, they wouldn't have the correct answer for how much you're actually producing. You also don't really know. You can try your best. For people who have great ethics, who want to do the right thing, they will try their best. But at the same time, because there is such a lack of almost like the market overseeing the accuracy of a financial report, do you think this actually creates a lot of problems on the social enterprise?
yeah, I think what you're saying is that there's less like objective truth. Does this create more of an issue? Um, Even the auditors that they send to go and verify your work, realistically, we knew can only actually go and sample so many farms and all that. So yeah, there's definitely, unfortunately, more scope for like, abuse, and I think it is documented. I believe there was a whole Oliver episode on carbon credits and just how, unfortunately, like a lot of that is being questioned because on the one side, it disincentivizes like the large corporations to change their like, behaviors, right? They're just like, oh, well, we can just buy credits. On the other side, you have places like game lodges for private hunting that are selling carbon credits because they have a couple of trees on their farm. That's the reality of it. I think it's the attitude of like not letting the perfect get in the way of the good. This is kind of the best we can do with all its flaws.
I see. The world is deeply imperfect, and we have to operate within it. Um, and maybe we can move on to a different project that you were working on besides the carbon.
Mm. The satellite imagery was something we didn't fully get off the ground, but the idea was simply this: we had somewhere on the order of like 50,000 distributed uh, smaller plots, over like a geographic area the size of like half of Kenya. When when you have like one big forest of trees where they're all uniformly planted and all that, it's
Right.
fairly easy to estimate like the square area and density, and then therefore it's really straightforward to be like, well, this is how many trees and what I have. When you're working with many farmers with plots that are all sorts of weird shapes, it becomes a much more difficult problem. You can't forever be sending out people with motorbikes to go and measure the trees. That's not scalable. So the idea was that we wanted to develop a way to be able to like, detect our farms from the air. Like, is there a change in this polygon? Like, do we see it getting greener? Do we see the trees getting larger? Or do we see that like, half of them are missing? The trees have been stolen or eaten. Or these things have happened. So that was a satellite project. And then sometimes we just had much more like simple operational stuff. Let's see. All the farmers had to have paper contracts for legal reasons because like you're working with people in the field and you need to have something to hold on to. And our field team also had an app that they used when they were like enrolling the farmers and capturing the data as to the location of the farms and whatever else. These two things, which should be speaking about the same people, often didn't match up. And so what was happening is that every year after enrollment, the data team or like part of the data team would spend like a month just basically checking these paper contracts against what's registered in the app to make sure the information was the same. And our sort of value add to that is we redesigned the form so they would be optimized to be read by computer vision. So having like specific like boxes where we know certain data points would be, and then being able to use that to sort of automate the process of extracting the data from those paper forms and comparing them against a database. That was 400 to 500 working hours saved just on that.
Makes a lot of sense. If you take one step back, what are the other issues that are more systematic that you find it's difficult to solve without a larger move in the picture?
We discussed a little bit outside of just the algorithm kind of context of things. Some of the things are just everything around building a solution that needs to work. So I think you'd made the analogy where like you build a model, you look at data science as like building a car. Maybe the model is the engine, and then you've got all the other things around it that need to work for the engine to run. So we're talking about the wheels and all of that. And so I think for that, there's just a lot of how do you get people to use the tool right? How do you get to folks to understand like, all right, this is what data can do, this is what data can't do. Even just having ownership of the data, I think is just some of the big stuff. Like this one threw me up the wall. We had different business units. One was using imperial measures and the other one was using metric. And they
Wow.
were adjacent business units. And then surprised, they couldn't agree on how much wood was flowing through. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Right. So in our personal chats, I think we really talk a lot about like how to think about the picture at large, how to design, help morph a system to a place where it's also suitable for, you know, growing successful data science project. For example, identify information on the documents. Maybe you even run into problems like what happens when people don't have a good camera on their phone.
I mean, you say that. It was literally, we had to tell them, please take the photo in the right orientation. Please don't scrunch the paper.
Right. And it's the supply chain with an entire ecosystem around data. And it's kind of mind blowing, even for big tech that I've had contacts with. I talk to them. Upstream data quality is a huge issue. Managing that for a social enterprise that is not natively digital in the sense that the core business is not digital product
Yeah.
is very, very hard. How do you see that we can shift that a little bit?
Yeah. We're talking about a data literacy problem. If I'm being really open-minded about this, I would say it sort of goes both ways. Sometimes the data science teams also don't understand, why can't you get the tree measurements right? Like it's not that hard. Just run a piece of tape around the tree, you know? So our best tool actually to work against that was, it sounds dead obvious, but it's so true. We would send our data teams to go and do some harvest and tree distribution. So they would see like, oh, okay, now I understand why these guys are complaining as to why it's hard to get data. And to an extent, we were trying to do more and more with the field teams and showing them, hey, these are the results of your data. This is why we sent you to collect the tree information. This is what we can understand from it. It's a two-way like street as far as like educating teams. And I think that's kind of a big part of it. Like sometimes it's just the other people can't imagine what they don't know. It's really what it comes down to. I think the best thing you can do is find the right people to show what's possible and have them like sort of convert their teams to your side. It's almost like a design problem. On the one hand, you absolutely want people that are really strong thinking in algorithmic terms, right? Like it's literally the engine, as you say. But for the team to really be successful, you sort of need to complement those with people that like, oh no, I need to understand how this algorithm is actually going to impact the humans on the other end and sort of all of the like, human things that are going to go along with it, that are going to make or break the differences to actually whether this model is used or it's used successfully. But this even goes back to like, frankly, like Deloitte days. You could build something really great and folks would be like, yeah, but I know my existing process, I'm comfortable with it. So unless you clearly show me why this is going to help me, I don't care what so-and-so manager said, like, they're not doing this work, so I'm not going to use it. Plain and simple.
Now that I'm out of the consulting world and taking a step back, thinking about the type of work that I was doing there and also the type of work now that I'm doing in order to really deliver something end to end.
Yeah.
In consulting, I think the incentive structure and also the way that usually it's being operated, it's like we come up with some type of strategy or proof of concept, deliver to the client, and you're like, use this. But and then we're out.
And then we're out. Exactly. So what happens afterwards? Whatever. Yeah, no, consulting was interesting as it just sort of inured you to, like, this is where my project ends, and everything that happens subsequently is basically somebody else's problem. The reality of a company is that, if you want this to go all the way through, all the subsequent things are your problems as well. And, sometimes there can be as much to solve there as the, model development itself.
Yeah, for sure. Is Komaza still around?
Unfortunately not.
What do you think was the gravity that brought it down? Is it the business model? Is it incentives? Is it something else?
I think there was a little bit of a disconnect between what the investors wanted and what the founders were aiming at. And this is just my opinion, but I think there was also some disconnect created by the fact that there were different investors that had sort of different points of view. Some investors were viewing this really much as an operational forestry company that needed to pretty much be profitable from the get-go. And I think some parts of the company were like, no, let's do more like a Silicon Valley-esque like startup model where we're going to run at a deficit for a long time. And once we reach a certain scale, then we're going to start turning profits. Those views are just not compatible. And so at some point, the investors that were sort of financing the profitable operational company model were just like, we're not behind just throwing good money into bad. So we're out.
I see. Both sides have their own interest and perspective. It's just unfortunate there are so many clashes and misalignment.
Yeah, exactly. Both are business models, but they're not the same business model. You're going to have very different expectations of what good looks like. And at the end of the day, that sort of disconnect came to a forefront, and what was viewed as safe money coming in didn't come in. And then it was just the reality of the cash flows running dry pretty fast after that.
At least you got so many interesting insights into, the stories behind each data point. And it sounds like a very adventurous experience, honestly.
I really enjoyed my time there. I really enjoyed the people I worked with, and I thought I was incredibly privileged to be able to do data science work and get to hop in and hop out of Africa and get out to the countryside and interact with farmers and stuff. I just thought, like, this is so far from what I was doing before, traveling to big cities and sitting in boardrooms. I'm very happy for the experience. I think we did do some good. Obviously, it's not the ending that I would have preferred, but I think there were some good learnings, and I hope the people that were involved in this can do a successful version of it, whatever that might be.
This could be the last episode of Floating Questions, or it may not be. Either way, I hope you enjoyed flowing along with us today. If you liked our journey, please consider subscribing. Thank you for listening, and may the questions always be with you.